Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the MMA Sucker podcast with myself, your host, Frazer Krohn. And let's talk about last night, UFC 300. It's finally now one for the books. We've had the event, we've had the fallout, we've had some of the best performances that we've ever seen in the octagon. We've had career best performances from people who have already been champion. We've had an inevitability in some senses. We had shocks, we had surprises, we had multiple fight of the night potential. And it's now one for the books. And it's now time for us to break it all down. So I just want to talk about a little bit about the event as a whole, fight week. We obviously found out a lot of content, myself in particular, on MMAsucker.com. I'll leave my link to my author page down below. So you can catch all the articles that I did there. I did over on MMA Sucker. But what a fight week it was. It was really good. We got the announcement of the new gloves that haven't really changed much. The color of the glove, from my understanding, in main events will change. Aside from that, there's not an awful lot of difference. Fight week, the press conference with every single fighter there was good. And thank the Lord for Jamal Hill because he actually injected some energy into that press conference. It was a little bit flat at times. We didn't have an awful lot of sort of trash talking from any of the guys. It's not any of the guys' style. It's not saying that we need that from a press conference, but it wouldn't have gone amiss. Let's say that. Weigh-ins, everybody made weight, including Kayla Harrison, which I'll come on to talk to a little bit later when I talk about her performance at UFC 300. But that was a sort of big question mark, as it were, whether Kayla Harrison would make weight, and she did with, I wouldn't say with ease. She looked pretty gaunt on the scales, but she weighed in well within the 2 hour mark. Sort of in the middle of the pack, as it were. She wasn't the first, she wasn't the last sort of batch of fighters. And she made weight well. Ceremonial weigh-ins were really fun, as they always tend to be. And then we go on to the event itself. I know I tried to watch some of the early prelims on Discovery Plus, and they were having a lot of audio issues, so I switched over to Fight Pass where the audio was immaculate. Bit of a disappointment. But for me, the event as a whole felt a little bit, ignoring all the fights for a moment, the event as a whole felt a little bit same old, same old. There was no special entrances. This is UFC 300, guys. Remember, this is the 300th pay-per-view in UFC history, or 300, the 300th numbered event, I should say, in UFC history. And the octagon was the same. The gloves were the exact same. The entrances were the exact same. The whole sort of setup of the show was the exact same, maybe a couple more promos and a couple more sort of promotional videos, but all in all, very same old for me. They really missed a trick for me. And well, until the BMF title fight, everything was the exact same. We didn't have sort of a difference in the fight short, the different fight shorts that were available were really cool, don't get me wrong. But that didn't kick in until the BMF title fight with Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway. I just think, you instantly know the event when you see the octagon for UFC 200, the yellow gold octagon. You instantly know that was UFC 200. That was what turned out to be Nunes versus Tate, with Brock Lesnar sprinkled in there, Anderson Silva, DC sprinkled in there, etc., etc. For this, if you showed me the octagon, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between that octagon, UFC 299, UFC 298, I imagine UFC 301, 302, 303, etc. Why not? Why was that octagon not slightly different? Why was it not a red octagon? Why was it not a blue octagon? Why was it not a purple octagon? Why was it not another yellow octagon even? That wouldn't have, fans would not have complained if it was another yellow octagon. It just didn't feel like they'd almost made the effort. The gloves, the exact same gloves as always, from my understanding. Alex Pereira didn't have these special new gloves. I think even UFC 300, 200 had slightly different gloves. The only thing I really saw on the fight shorts of the guys were a little gold 300 logo. It's a bit same old. But putting that to bed, the main event of the evening, Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill. Myself and Tim spoke about it on the podcast last week. It was a real, real nice change to have Tim back on the podcast. Returning member. We did a whole host of podcasts together before we parted ways. It was great to have him back on the podcast. A real good friend of mine and a real smart brain in the world of combat sports. So shout out to Tim for coming on board last week. But we spoke about the main event, about the inevitability that we saw in the main event, the grit and determination that Jamal Hill had. And Jamal Hill this week convinced me that I didn't think he was going to win purely because it's Alex Pereira, but Jamal Hill really put himself out there as a viable contender. As I think he convinced a lot more people than when the fight was first announced. The press conference, he had that sort of thing of the sort of Easter Island head, and he's sort of hyping up the crowd. Then he was speaking really well at the press conference. The weigh-ins, he looked good on the scales. He was, you could see that he was in good shape. Even on fight night, coming out to the champ is here, um, pacing the octagon when Alex Pereira was making his walk and being the one to sort of welcome him to the octagon. Stare down, didn't show any fear. Not that, no one showed fear against Alex Pereira, but Jamal Hill really sort of was trying to get across to Alex Pereira that it's his octagon. And then the fight started. And for me, Alex Pereira was a little bit more tentative than usual. Um, he was just getting his range from Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill landed, I think he landed a right hook on Alex Pereira, and that's when Alex Pereira began to walk him down. He felt the power of Jamal Hill and felt that the power of Jamal Hill just wasn't enough. He wasn't bothered about the power of Jamal Hill to sort of. It didn't make him take that step back. It wasn't Jamal Hill's speed didn't make him double sort of think about anything. He felt the power and wasn't phased by it at all. And that's why we saw him begin to walk forward. Jamal Hill landed it sounded like a cup shot. Herb Dean went to step in. Alex Pereira was one of the best moments in UFC history, really. If you think about it, he stopped the referee, he walked forward, and he left hooked Jamal Hill, and he did to Jamal Hill what Jamal Hill did to Johnny Walker. It kind of froze. He knocked him down. It kind of froze him. He almost knocked him out, kind of standing, and a couple of ground and pound shots finished the fight. Official time 3 minutes 14 of the very first round. Let's talk a little bit about Alex Pereira because I don't actually want to talk about this fight too much because the inevitable, we spoke about this fight before. Jamal Hill didn't look great in there, but he didn't look too bad. But I think he was just coming up against Alex Pereira, who is the king. He is the king of the 205-pound division. But let's talk about the power that Alex Pereira has in his hands that I really do think could transfer up to heavyweight if and when he decides to move up, because he didn't even seem to clip, or he didn't even seem to catch Jamal Hill flush. He seemed to almost clip him. And that's all it took to knock Jamal Hill out. Taking into account this is Jamal Hill who's never been KO'd in his life. He's got scary power, Alex Pereira, and he just proved that he was miles and miles above Jamal Hill. Like I said, prior to the fight, Jamal Hill really did kind of convince me that he would have had a shot at defeating Alex Pereira if he could catch him. But when he did catch him, he just didn't have the power. He just didn't have the power. The chin of Alex Pereira at 205 is something to behold. And what's next? For me, you've got two contenders at 205. You've got the man who we'll come on to talk about a little bit later in Jiri Prochazka, who picked up, he got back in the win column last night. And you've got Magomed Ankalaev. Ankalaev it's a different test for Alex Pereira because it's not someone that he's faced before. Obviously, he's faced Jiri before and knocked him out. But Ankalaev is coming off, he's coming off a draw against Jan Blachowicz, that no contest against Johnny Walker, and then a performance of the night winning knockout of Johnny Walker last time out. It's certainly a different a different test for Alex Pereira, but I still think Alex Pereira beats him. I'd rather see the Jiri Prochazka fight, just personal preference. That's for me the fight to make. But was Alex Pereira the right man to headline UFC 300? I'd say so, given the circumstances of there wasn't an awful lot there, to be honest. I'd say he was probably the right person to headline the event. Moving on to a really fun co-main event between Zhang Weili and Yang Xiaonan. The first round saw Zhang Weili on the back foot a lot because of Yan Xiaonan's power. However, once she got the fight to the floor, it was in her world. She locked in that choke at the end of the first round, and she definitely put Yang Xiaonan out. Yang Xiaonan, she stood up. The commission guy was behind her. She sort of fell backwards into him. I think 2 more seconds, maybe even 1 more second, and that fight is over in the first round. The second round, I thought she recovered really well from that sort of choke out, and I think Zhang Weili, I think she kind of gassed herself out in that second round with the arm triangle attempt. 3 minutes 51 control time for Zhang Weili, 54 significant strikes landed, and she wasn't able to get her opponent out of there. And that's why I think in the third round we saw her really gassed out. She was dropped by Yang Xiaonan. I think she was dropped again in the fourth, but it wasn't actually. I think it was probably deemed more of a slip. But um, Yang Xiaonan was the one taking down Zhang Weili, which is not something that we really thought of. Twice in that third round, and she also took her down once in the first round, of course, early on. But for me, it was a really competitive fight on the feet, and then when it hit the ground, it was all Zhang Weili. And that was a little bit disappointing from Yang Xiaonan. She showed that she's got amazing heart, real, real tough girl. But the output for me wasn't there across 5 rounds. 116 total strikes thrown, 73 landed. Granted, she was on her back for a lot of the fight, so she's not going to be throwing up an awful lot of offense from her back, strikes wise. Um, but she just, when she gets that wrestling game sort of rounded out, she's going to be a serious, serious force to reckon with because it was competitive on the feet. Sorry, she was hitting Zhang Weili as Zhang Weili was throwing the low kick. She was countering the low kick really well with straight shots and taking her down. Um, she took corner work really well as well, Yang Xiaonan, whereas Zhang Weili wasn't. She was ignoring her corner. She's still going for the sort of low leg kicks, which led to her being dropped in that third round and sort of thrown off balance a number of times. Yang Xiaonan for me is a serious, serious prospect in the sport. I think this title shot may have just come a little bit too soon for her because now she's at Team Alpha Male. Just looking down the rankings now, she probably faces Amanda Lemos next. But it's a shallow division, strawweight. Jessica Andrade obviously picked up a win against Marina Rodriguez. Yang Xiaonan versus Marina Rodriguez is a good fight. I'm not sure if those two women have fought before. I can't remember off the top of my head. But what I would say is that the shot maybe came a little bit too soon because the game wasn't well rounded enough. Like I said, on the feet, it's a really, really fun, competitive fight where realistically, if it was a kickboxing fight or a Muay Thai fight, I think Yang Xiaonan would have walked away with the victory. But this is mixed martial arts at the end of the day. You need to be well rounded in all facets of the game. It's not just a stand up fight. It's a mixed martial arts fight. And Zhang Weili, a class kind of shone through, and she was able to eventually get the win. I think one of the scorecards 49-45 on score on across all three scorecards. So yeah, that 10-8 round. I think that's probably the second round, the 10-8. It is what it is for me. Yang Xiaonan, I did pick Zhang Weili going in. I thought she was more well-rounded, and that showed on the night. It was a really good performance from both women. I don't think Yang Xiaonan's stock drops at all, surviving that first round rear naked choke. But like I said, she was out. She was out at the end of that fight. Two more seconds, maybe even 1 more second. And Zhang Weili walked away with the first round submission, potential 300K bonus. The referee stopped. The referee Jason Herzog jumped in, obviously at the end of the round, and Yang Xiaonan was, for all intents and purposes, she was out. Joe Rogan, DC, and John Allen were talking about it, and they were saying that it's not like a knockout; it's a blood choke. So once the blood rushes back to the head, you're good to go again. And And that showed. That showed. She did fairly well in that second round to sort of recover and get her wits about her again. In that third round, she began to take over, and then Zhang Weili sort of went back to her to doing her game, as it were, in the fourth round. Two takedowns, 3 minutes control time. Fifth round, two takedowns, 3 minutes 50 control time. So we know what Zhang Weili wants to do these days. She'll stay competitive on the feet for as long as she wants to, and then she'll take the fight down. And she's so good at, she's really adapted the game, and that's really important. And it's a real good sort of asset to have for Zhang Weili. Zhang Weili now 4 fight winning streak. Obviously, two title defenses to a name against Amanda Lemos and Yan Zhao. Next up for Zhang Weili, who knows? Maybe Tatiana Suarez if she can stay fit. More likely a Jessica Andrade rematch, but we'll see. A really good performance by Zhang Weili after a tough third round. After she was fatigued, she does need to work on taking advice from her corner a little bit better because I don't feel that she did really take the advice from her corner that well. That could come around to sting her in the future, but it is what it is. When you get to be the champion, you kind of can, you've got the skills to do whatever in there, and Zhang Weili showed that. But let's move on to the BMF title bout. One of the best fights I've seen in a long, long time. In my notes here, I'm just going to read my notes. The third last bullet point. It wasn't just KO of the night; it was KO of the ever. It's one of the best knockouts I've seen in UFC history. And why was that? It was the most gangster moment we've ever seen in UFC history, without a doubt. That last 10 seconds will be shown for years to come, years and years to come. But we need the context for that last 10 seconds. So let's throw it back to the beginning of the fight. Obviously, it was the first walkout of the guys with the new shorts. So that was something a little bit different. But the first round, Max looked elite. He was checking the leg kicks really well. He landed big and was hurting Gaethje and was always aware of his space. He was always aware of his space. He was backing up. He wasn't getting stuck against the fence. And when he did, he circled out to the safe side, as it were. And then we got to the last 10 seconds. And Max did this in every round, I think, apart from the fourth, when he had he did have a tough fourth round, to be fair. But um, he did it in every round where the last 10 seconds he'd really explode. He'd throw a spinning back kick, or he'd obviously in the last 10 seconds of the fifth, he'd throw down with Gaethje, but he'd really step into that fire with Gaethje. And in the last second of the first round, he threw that spinning. We've seen him throw it before, but he threw that sort of spinning heel kick, and it's not intended to. It's not really thrown with an intention to land to the head of the face or anything. It's intended to land with the heel to the solar plexus, to the body, and really take the air out of your opponent. And it's a really good strike to throw, and an intelligent strike to throw at that time of the fight, because it sends a message to the judges for a start, and it also sends a massive message to your opponent, where your opponent, if it does catch the solar plexus and whatnot, it sends your opponent back gasping for air. Now, what it did for Max is that as he threw it, Gaethje, I'll have to rewatch the fight, but as he threw it, Gaethje either ducked down and sort of covered up to defend it, or he threw a punch and sort of bent over to defend the punch. And it landed flush on Gaethje's nose and instantly broke his nose. And that affected him for the rest of the fight. And that was a fight ending, or it was a fight altering scenario, which with, I say unintentional, but it was intentional for Max, but the intention wasn't for it to land and break the nose of Gaethje. And when you're coming up against a boxer like Max Holloway, and such an elite boxer like Max Holloway, you've got a nose injury, you've got any sort of facial injury. We saw it in earlier on in the Bobby Green fight. These elite boxers will punish you for, by targeting that injury. And that's exactly what Max did. He looked elite in that first round. Second round, I was a little bit disappointed in Max. There's two eye pokes. Should the point have been taken away? Quite possibly. It turns out it wouldn't have made a difference. But it was the volume of Max Holloway and the power of Max Holloway. It was just really, it was just the low leg kicks for Gaethje that were landing. He had the odd sort of shot that did land on Max's sort of body or head, but just the shots. If we just look at the first two rounds before Gaethje really started to have any sort of success, leg kicks, 6 or 7 leg kicks landed for Justin Gaethje. 2 shots to the body, 4 shots to the head landed. In the second round, 6 shots to the head, 3 shots to the body, 9 leg kicks. In the third round, he had a little bit more success to the body, nine landed, and then 6 leg kicks and 5 shots to the head. And then the fourth and fifth round. I mean, the fourth round was Gaethje's best round. But heading into that fourth round, I had it 3-0 Holloway, and it seemed that he was landing the big shots. The jab to the body was exposing the head of Gaethje. It was bringing the hands down of Gaethje. It was bringing the big overhands of Max, to the forefront, as it were. The leg kicks that Gaethje likes to use sort of almost in the clinch on the inside weren't really working for him because Max was landing just big, real tight, powerful hooks, and it was sort of not knocking Gaethje down, but it was knocking him off every time, and that's what really, paid dividends for Max because it prevented Gaethje from really getting into range with Max because every time he did, he was punished for it. Fourth round, really good fourth round for Gaethje. He dropped Max. I don't know why it hasn't been accredited on UFC stats, but he did drop Max. For me, Gaethje's a confident striker. When he's doing well, he'll continue to do well, and when he's not, when he's behind on the scorecards like he was on Saturday night, he won't do so well. Because we saw it when he dropped Max Holloway, and when he was doing well in the fourth, he dropped Max Holloway, and after he dropped Max Holloway, he did really well then as well. It's the first time Max has ever been dropped, so I don't really know why it wasn't accredited. But it is what it is. Then that fifth round started, and for me, Justin Gaethje was 3-1 down, and Max Holloway 3-1 up. So Max Holloway knew that he just had to survive the round. As long as he wasn't knocked out or submitted or disqualified or whatever, he would have won the fight. He would have won the BMF title fight. And he dominated that final round as well. 62 shots landed to 18 of Justin Gaethje. He threw 103 total strikes. It was the output of Max Holloway. It was the accuracy, and it was the power. We've never really regarded Max Holloway as a power striker. And should we start considering him as a power puncher? He's finished his last 2 opponents, in Chan Sung Jung with a knockout and Justin Gaethje with a knockout. But that, for me, is the most gangster moment in UFC history, without a shadow of a doubt. When he is 10 seconds away from winning the BMF title fight via decision, and he points to Justin Gaethje, like we saw him do against Ricardo Lamas all those years ago. He points to Justin Gaethje and, essentially says to him, let's throw it down. Let's throw it down in the middle of the octagon here. Let me give you a chance. Let me risk getting knocked out cold just to put on a show for these fans. And what happened? He landed the biggest overhand right, the biggest right of his career, and knocked Justin Gaethje out with 1 second in the last second of the fight. 4 minutes 59 seconds of round number 5. After he's on his way to a decision victory, and he lands and knocks Justin Gaethje out. He knocks Justin Gaethje out in a way that we've never seen Justin Gaethje knocked out before. We've seen Justin Gaethje stop twice before, and he was stopped from that knee from Eddie Alvarez, and he was essentially stopped on his feet against Dustin Poirier. We've never seen Justin Gaethje put out to sleep, and that's done via the hands of a guy who's coming up from featherweight in Max Holloway. I'll come on to that later on. But that is one of the best KOs you will see this year. It's one of the best KOs that you will see in UFC history, just for the moment itself. And that is what a real BMF is about. Jorge Masvidal won the belt, the BMF title bout, the inaugural BMF title bout via doctor stoppage. That's not gangster. Justin Gaethje won the belt off Dustin Poirier with a head kick. That's pretty gangster. But what's more gangster to cruising to a victory, to cruising to a unanimous decision victory risking it all, putting it all on the line, and then doing that. Joe Rogan's reaction was the exact same reaction as all fans had. And this is why we love this sport. That was one of the greatest knockouts you will see on one of the biggest stages. It got fight of the night, it got knockout of the night. Max Bless Holloway is walking away with 600K extra on top of his fight. But he, as he said himself, he is him. He is the man of the moment. He is the UFC 300 standout star, and he deserves all the plaudits that he's going to get for the rest of this week, for the rest of this, run until his next fight, and all of his next fight. I think he's going to take a lot of lessons from what he did against Justin Gaethje. He said the word of the week is violence, and that's exactly what he showed. And of course, Mark Coleman wrapping the bout round Max Holloway with a touch of class. UFC Hall of Famer Mark Coleman, and just commenting on the UFC Hall of Fame, as we know, Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen was number one, was inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame on the night, which was a nice touch. I didn't mind that. I didn't mind that touch. Moving on. See, this is what happens when you've got such a good fight card. You've just got to move on from what you can't go too in depth on any fighter, any fight or fighter, because we just haven't got the time. But moving on, Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. This was a tough fight to score, and I beg the question, why wasn't it 5 rounds? And I also have a question as to why have the caveat that this is a number one contenders fight if you're going to announce a title fight for the division on the same night as Arman Tsarukyan wins the fight. Why do that? Well, I don't understand that. It doesn't make logical sense. As we know, Islam Makhachev will face Dustin Poirier at UFC 302 in Newark, New Jersey. I think that's in May, end of May, potentially. I'll have to double check that. Let me just double check that now before I go speaking out of turn. UFC 202. No, so yeah, June 1st. June 1st. Headlined by Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. They really want Justin Poirier to hold the belt. This will be his, I think, 14th shot at a world title. No, this will be his. I think. Let me just double check. So he fought. Yeah. So he won the interim title against Max Holloway, lost to Khabib, and then he fought Charles Oliveira and lost to Charles Oliveira, and then he fought Justin Gaethje for the BMF title, lost to Justin Gaethje, and then he fought Benoit Saint-Denis. I'll go on to talk about that fight more at a later day, but I want to talk about Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. Like I said, it's very hard to score. I had it 2-1 Oliveira because of the fight ending scenarios, but I'm not mad. It's not a robbery. I'm not too bothered that Arman Tsarukyan won that one by split decision. It was a fun fight. What I did think was interesting is Arman Tsarukyan was very lucky that he had his sort of own. He was pulling in that guillotine choke in the first round. He was pulling his own hand, and he managed to create the leverage to escape. It was a really competitive fight, and Arman was pretty dominant on the floor. I spoke, when I was breaking this fight down with Tim last week, we were questioning whether it was 5 rounds because there was definitely a rumor that it was 5 rounds. But obviously, as we know, it was only across 3 rounds. But we did say Charles Oliveira is sometimes too happy to be lying on his back and not actually doing anything. And that kind of showed in this fight for me. Arman Tsarukyan, look at I know we can't take an awful lot from stats, but in this case we can. The stats, Arman Tsarukyan threw 117 punches. A lot of them were from, a dominant position on the ground. Landed 75 punches, total strikes, to Charles Oliveira's 33 total strikes. He clocked up 8 minutes 41 control time, whereas Charles just had a half a round's worth, 2 minutes 32. We do have to consider that the fight ending scenarios definitely were in the hands, as it were, of Charles Oliveira. He almost had that guillotine choke in the first round. He was working on a bit of an arm triangle in I think the second or first or second round. And then in that third round, he had this sort of anaconda Das choke kind of thing going on right at the very end of the fight, but that was never in. That was never, yeah, it was never really locked in. It's a little bit disappointing because I do think that they should have had Islam there. It is difficult with it, having only been Ramadan last week and Eid last week. But they could have had Islam there, and he could have faced off with Arman Tsarukyan, who should be the next contender. But obviously, as we know, it's Dustin Poirier. So Arman has now got to sit out. And what happens if what happens if the next fight is between Dustin and Islam is a draw? What happens if Dustin narrowly beats Israel Adesanya, Islam Makhachev, and it's a robbery, or Makhachev, controversially beats Dustin Poirier? They surely would get a rematch, and then you got Arman just set out for even longer. It's a little bit disappointing, but as Max Holloway would say, it is what it is. But that was a really hard fight for me to score. I did have it 2-1 Charles, but 2-1 Islam, I'm not mad about at all. Moving on, I'm not going to comment on this one too much because the sort of inevitability factor. My hype for this fight was low, and the actual fight itself wasn't great. Nickal wasn't that impressive, but Cody Brundage was. He wasn't able to take him down, I don't think, with as much ease as he thought he might do, and he was ragdolled around the octagon at times. Bo Nickal. I don't know what it is about Bo Nickal, but he certainly has looked more sort of shredded in the past, shall we say. He looked a little bit sort of fluffy, making 185. Could he, he didn't look awfully gaunt. Could he make 170? Who knows? At the moment, his skills are really showing in the wrestling game. We did see him extended into a second round for the first time in his certainly in his UFC career. I'm not sure if in his career as a whole, if he's seen a second round. I'll just double check that. I can't imagine that he has because he's been so dominant. No, so he's had all first round finishes prior to UFC 300. He was extended into the second round by Cody Brundage, I thought Cody Brundage put a real good sort of account of himself out there, and he was clearly disappointed because he went in there, showed some confidence, and I showed a willing to actually try and win the fight against Bo Nickal. When Nickal does take the step up in competition, I genuinely do think that he's going to struggle. If he comes up against someone who, has elite takedown defense, yes, he's we call Bo Nickal an Olympic caliber wrestler, but we've seen Olympic caliber wrestlers struggle in there before to get guys to the ground. Ben Askren was an Olympic caliber wrestler. No disrespect to Bo Nickal, but let's remember that he didn't actually get to the Olympics. From what I understand, he didn't. He's a phenomenal, he lost out in the final to David Taylor. So those of you that know wrestling, don't get me wrong, David Taylor went on to win a gold medal in Tokyo. So he lost to a legitimate gold medalist, but it's completely different when someone can throw a knee, throw an elbow in there. But for me, yeah, when Bo Nickal takes that step up, he's going to struggle. But we have to remember he's 6-0 in mixed martial arts. He's not, one of these elite guys. Tapology have got him ranked number 28 in the middleweight division. So now we have to instantly, for Bo Nickal, we think, what's next? You've got a lot of good fights out there for Bo Nickal. I think they'll keep building him fairly slowly, giving him fairly winnable fights, but maybe with names that guys have heard of. Jared Meerschaert, for example, who's good on the floor, so he has to be a little bit more careful. Mikhail Olenjaychuk, Jacob Malkoun, all of these guys are probably guys that we'll see Bo Nickal in there with next. But I thought it was really good that he was hypercritical of his own performance, because for Bo Nickal, it wasn't up to his normal standards, for want of a better phrase. He usually shows a lot of a much more well-rounded game than that, and he wasn't able to at UFC 300. That was down to Cody Brundage putting in a really good performance, going in there with a lot of confidence. And like I said, Bo Nickal will be really quite critical of his own performance. Going to move on to the prelims now. There's obviously the 4 prelims fights that went down, and then the 4 early prelims fights. I'm going to just breeze over a lot of these because and not an awful lot of talking points, but I do want to talk in particular about Kayla. But the headline preliminary bout saw Jiri Prochazka do Jiri Prochazka shit. He was behind on the scorecards after that first round. His front leg was absolutely battered. Um, he was getting clipped by Rakic. He was getting landed on by Rakic. But Rakic didn't have the KO power to hurt Jiri Prochazka. He caught him a number of times. You know, we're talking in that first round. Rakic landed 36 significant strikes, most of which were to the head and legs. You know, he landed 19 shots to the head, 17 leg kicks, and that is going to affect Jiri Prochazka's movement, and it did. We could see him sort of half stepping, as it were, on that front leg, and that's because the front leg was battered of Jiri Prochazka, but he didn't he didn't have the power in his hands to really phase Jiri. And that's what led to the KO. Jiri, once he clipped Rakic clean, it was game over. He was like a dog with a bone. He was rabid, just straight for the KO. Really good, call out. I don't care who the champ. He essentially said, "I don't care who the champion is, but I want the champion." And I think that was a logical call out because he has only just lost to the champion, Alex Pereira, and he was winning that fight until he was obviously clipped in that second round. The next fight up, we had Sterling versus Qatar. A little bit of Sterling is guilty of having quite a not the most entertaining style. However, it's really effective. I think he's got an exciting future in the featherweight division. He looked quick, he looked strong, he looked relaxed, and I think he's finally in the right weight class. Can't really say much more. We didn't learn anything from Aljamain Sterling. All we learned is that, yeah, a huge bantamweight is good at featherweight. It's just kind of yeah, we knew that beforehand, and we know that again now. Um, I want to see him face someone, a highly ranked guy next. Arnold Allen, I think would be a good fight. He was obviously taken down a lot against Movsar Evelev, but for Sterling, unfortunately for Sterling, he doesn't have the most entertaining style. He does rock the mic, but not in a way that's really getting fans going. Realistically, he deserves a title shot. Is he going to get one? Definitely not, because Max Holloway is probably going to get that next shot. But it's difficult. It's difficult for Aljamain Sterling just because of his fight style. Someone that will, I do think, genuinely will get a title shot is Kayla Harrison. She was awesome. She was elite, and she was exactly what everyone's been saying she is. She came over from the PFL where she'd been facing, let's be honest, lower ranked girls, girls that are not as skilled as the girls that she's going to be facing in the UFC. I'm sorry to say it, but it's just a fact. The big question around Kayla Harrison all week was how is she going to make weight, and if she does, how is she going to be at the weight? She looked gaunt at the weight. She looked very drawn out at 136 pounds. Did that show on fight night? Absolutely not. I was a little bit worried. I spoke to me and Tim spoke about it in depth. I'll link last week's podcast so you can sort of hear our discussion on Kayla Harrison's weight, which you know was the big talking point. She was ripped. She was shredded to bits. She obviously lost a lot of muscle mass to get down to the weight um for this fight, but it didn't affect her in the fight. She was big in there as well. Her back muscles were big. And let's be honest, she's facing Holly Holm, a girl that is a perennial top contender at 135 and across 145. She had multiple title shots. Kayla Harrison treated her like a sparring partner. She was dominant on the ground. For me, it was a 10-8 for Kayla in that first round. Let's pull up the stats. Kayla, yeah, that first round, we saw Kayla land 56 total strikes to Holly Holm's 6. And it was, let's not forget, it was Holly Holm that showed a lapse in judgment and initiated the clinch in that first round, which saw her get hip tossed by Kayla. She then did counter Kayla, but Kayla was able to counter her back. It was a bad idea. It was a bad game plan. I don't know if that was part of the game plan to try and, get to knock some of the wind, as it were, out of the sails of Kayla Harrison. But it was a really poor idea to even debate clinching with Kayla Harrison, in my opinion. And Kayla is a different type of striker when she's on the floor. Now that she can use her elbow, she's nasty. She's horrible on the floor, and it's good. It's good to see straight up. I enjoy that. You know, we haven't had a ferocious female wrestling star with vicious ground and pound for a long time. We haven't had a girl that is as dominant in one specific area of mixed martial arts as Kayla Harrison, probably since Ronda. Maybe, Amanda Nunes was the most well-rounded, I think, female mixed martial artist we've seen. But she wasn't dominant in just one area. She was heavy-handed on the feet. She was heavy-footed in the kick game, as it were. And she had, really, really elite wrestling and elite ground game. But Kayla, for me, we don't know too much about her stand-up game, but what we saw from her ground game is just some of the best work you're going to see, especially her ground game and her game in the clinch. At one point, she threw a head kick, dived under, and got a double leg. Lovely stuff. And for me, she has to get a title shot next. She obviously finished the fight via rear naked choke. She's obviously got a squeeze as well. She's obviously got a squeeze because Holly tapped pretty quick after that rear naked choke was in. She's obviously got a squeeze. She's such a nice person as well. She gave props to Holly Holm straight off the bat. And I want to see her get a title shot next because she also matches up really well with the UFC champion Raquel Pennington. She matches up really, really well with her because Raquel will look to probably get the fight to the floor and fight in the clinch, which is exactly where Harrison wants to be. And Harrison, for me, could potentially be that female pay-per-view star that UFC have been missing for a long time. And it's really exciting. The future of Kayla Harrison. It's strange to talk about the future of a girl that's been, I think she's got 16-0 now as a mixed martial artist. Sorry, 16-1 now as a mixed martial artist. Sorry, 17-1 now as a mixed martial artist. Two-time Olympic gold medalist. But to talk about her future is she's a really exciting prospect in the UFC. She's not a prospect, of course, overall, but in the UFC, she's a really exciting prospect. Talking about prospects, Diego Lopez, what a performance by Diego Lopez. And he's got to feel really hard done by not to get a performance of the night bonus. I'm sure Dana will have given him some sort of little package, as it were. But Diego Lopez knocks out Sadiq Youssef in a minute and a half, drops him twice and knocks him out, and doesn't get any sort of props for it. It's a little bit disappointing if you're Diego Lopez, but when you've got performances like Max Holloway's and Jiri Prochazka's on the same card, it's going to be tough. But he's a real problem. He's got some of the probably, he just gets it. He just gets it from everything. Everything. He gets it, and he's got insane KO power. So the first four fights of the night, but the last four fights I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to be really quick. Moicano, Turner. Moicano knew that he was better on the ground. And if I was Jalen Turner, I'd be kicking myself because in that first round when he dropped Moicano, he wanted that walk-off KO because he had the 300K in the back of his head and he wanted that walk-off KO. Moicano rallied, came from behind and dominated and finished things on the floor with a TKO. That wasn't a sub, remember, that was a TKO finish. And that was, like I said, because in my opinion, because Jalen Turner had in the back of his mind, if I get a walk-off KO, I've got to get 300K. Do your job, knock your man out, finish it with hammer fists, and if it's a good enough knockout, you'll get the 300K. Turner really dropped the ball in that one, and it's a shame because he's now 1-3 in his last four fights. Yeah, these are against some of the most elite guys in the game, but facts are facts, unfortunately. Andrade versus Rodriguez. Andrade could very much see himself in a rematch with Zhang Weili. Good distance management from Rodriguez in the first before she slipped, and then Andrade just took over from there. In my opinion, leg kicks really hampered the movement of Rodriguez throughout the fight. But she and Andrade with this win has put herself in a good position. She's put herself right in the mix of of the strawweight division. And realistically, we could see a rematch because it's got a little bit of a storyline behind it. Moving on, Bobby Green versus Jim effin Miller. Great first round. Green landed that front kick with the straight behind it. Really struck. Really caused. Was really effective because it caused Jim Miller to really struggle with it. But for me, Miller had the more eye-catching shots. With that being said, you know, Bobby Green just took over. He was too quick for Miller. He had really good accuracy when he blew up that eye. Um, he blew up that eye of Jim Miller, and you know, cut below the eye, cut above the eye. He was talking to him in there. But how tough is Jim Miller? He was dropped at the end of that, I think, third round. He dropped at the end of that round. Bobby Green landed 186 significant strikes of 319 thrown. So tough, and it was a great call out from Green, calling out Paddy Pimblett for UFC Manchester in July, and you know I'm behind it. I'm here for that. And the opening fight of the night saw Devison Figueiredo submit Cody Garbrandt in the second round of their fight. I felt Figgy struggled on the feet with the speed of Garbrandt in that first round. That's why he constantly looked to close the distance. But when he did close the distance and get the fight to the floor, he took over. Garbrandt, you know, we've never really seen we haven't seen an awful lot of Cody on his back. But he when he was on his back, he was sort of struggling, as it were. He did look like he had good sub defense prior to the actual submission finish. I think it was the arm triangle. He stayed really quite calm in that situation. But you know, Figgy just took over on the ground in the end, and I think he's leaning now into what he needs to be. Has his power really carried up to bantamweight? We're not quite sure yet, but his skills have certainly carried up to bantamweight because he's one of the most skilled bantamweights now on the planet. He's one of the most well-rounded guys on the planet. But we have to ask now, you know, a win over Rob Font, a win over Cody Garbrandt. Are they big enough wins to get a title shot? For me, no. I want to see him against Petty Yan next, a man who's difficult to take down if it isn't going your way on the feet. I think that would be a phenomenal fight. Davison Figueiredo versus Petty Yan across 5 rounds. I want to test the 5 round cardio of Davison Figueiredo. But that was UFC 300 in what are we now? In a 48-minute nutshell, I guess. It was a really good event. Every fighter really went out there and fought like they were fighting on UFC 300, if that makes sense. Really good fight card, great promotion. Press conference afterwards, we had 3 fights announced. We had 3 fights announced. We had like the one that I've already mentioned, Islam Makhachev versus Dustin Poirier for the lightweight title on June the 1st. The co-main event of that pay-per-view will be Paulo Costa versus Sean Strickland across 5 rounds. Okay, 2 guys coming off losses. Is what it is. Obviously, Sean Strickland's not getting that rematch that he's begging for, which would suggest that, you know, either Israel Adesanya or Robert Whittaker will get the rematch. That middleweight division's up in the air a bit at the moment, but, you know, it is what it is. And the return of the Mac is confirmed. Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler for UFC 303 International Fight Week at welterweight at 170 pounds is official. We'll go on to break that down a little bit more later on in the week, but that was your 3 fight announcements from Dana White at the end of at the beginning of the press conference. For me, they really missed a trick, not especially the McGregor one. They really missed a trick not having a promo package ready to go to play in between the BMF title fight and the co-main event, or in between the co-main event and the main event. That was a trick missed for me, because what better way to hype the return of the biggest star the sport's ever seen than to drop a sweet promo package ahead of UFC 303 to get fans looking forward to it. Ball was dropped. It's just Dana White reading off a piece of paper saying, "Oh, yeah, the return of my cash cow is confirmed," is what it is. But let that not jade your UFC 300 experience, because like I said, it was one of the best cards we have ever seen. On paper, it was the best card we'd ever got. In reality, we saw one of the best KOs that we're ever going to see. One of the biggest, probably the biggest gangster moment in UFC history, confirmed from Max Holloway. Number of really big performances throughout the card. Kayla Harrison has arrived in the UFC. Alex Pereira is the man at 205. Could possibly be the man at heavyweight. We'll have to wait and see. Max Holloway is the man at anywhere between 140 and 155, 145 and 155 pounds. Bo Nickal is, finally got some rounds under his belt. Arman Tsarukyan should be next. It's the new guard taking over from the old guard. Jiri Prochazka's back in the win column. We've got, like I said, Aljamain Sterling is now, a bona fide featherweight and looking good at the weight. Like I said, Kayla has arrived. Diego Lopez is, the prospect that we thought he might be, and he's really turning into it. Money Moicano is back on, back kind of, I think lightweight is Moicano's division. He's in the win column again. Andrade has really put herself in the shot window for a potential strawweight title fight against the woman that I actually forgot to mention, Zhang Weili. Um, Jim Miller still as tough as they come. Bobby Green still as fun as they come. And Figueiredo at bantamweight is a legitimate problem. Thanks for listening, guys. Do me a favor, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're putting a lot more videos out on the channel in recent weeks. So, it's an exciting time to be a subscriber to MMA Sucker so you don't miss anything. Like, comment, share, all that good stuff. I'll catch you next week.